Welcome back to Bad Things in History, where we've been bringing you the best of the worst of human history for 3 years at the time of this recording. If you can drop a kind word in a comment, I'll personally appreciate it. Our series examining the worst events in each state continues. This time, thanks to a viewer's suggestion, we are going to look at Oregon. In case you think your comments don't matter, this episode is proof they do. The state of Oregon is located in the Pacific Northwest and is full of natural beauty. It's also a giant container of death and suffering. Let's begin with a missionary in the 1800s who angered the natives and got himself killed. The Whitman Massacre. The Cayuse are a Native American tribe that originally inhabited Oregon and parts of southern Washington. They were somewhat nomadic, traveling as the seasons changed. The Cayuse were also known for being fierce warriors and skilled horse riders, but they couldn't resist the onslaught of new settlers. In 1842, the Oregon Trail opened. It started in Independence, Missouri, and stretched all the way to Willamette Valley in Oregon. Traveling this distance was extremely hazardous. Accidents and disease frequently visited those who made the journey. Despite the hazards, white settlers poured into Oregon over the next several years. As white settlers arrived, they also brought European diseases with them. The natives may not have understood germ theory, but the Cayuse observed that they grew sick and died when new settlers arrived. One of these settlers would do his part to try and treat their illnesses. Marcus Whitman was born in Federal Hollow, New York on September 4, 1802. As a young man, he dreamed of becoming a minister and bringing the teachings of Jesus to natives throughout North America. In 1835, he was doing God's work in Idaho. The fur trappers in the territory started becoming sick from an outbreak of cholera. Marcus took care of them, and most of those who became ill recovered. Marcus soon had a reputation for being a skilled healer. In 1836, Marcus married Narcissa Prentice. She was a physics and chemistry teacher who wanted to go west and work as a missionary too. The couple traveled to Oregon in 1836 along with several other missionary couples. They established schools and took in orphaned children. The relationship between the Whitmans and the Cayuse was friendly at first. The natives were under a lot of pressure as white hunters moved into the area, so they made it a point to always require payment from white missionaries in exchange for land and supplies. By 1842, Marcus was starting to anger the Cayuse. He built a church on their land and never paid them. He grew crops on farms around the church and gave none of it to the Cayuse. So they started helping themselves to the crops as, from their point of view, the missionaries were trespassing. At one point, the white settlers tried to stop the Cayuse from stealing crops by poisoning some of the plants. They also left tainted meat out for wolves, though some of the natives ate it too. Several Cayuse became sick, but none of them died. When the leader of the tribe visited Marcus and complained about the poisoned food, Marcus laughed. In 1846, a measles epidemic broke out. White settlers were infected, but so were the Cayuse. And having no immunity to the disease, many of them died. Marcus Whitman did what he could to treat the sick natives, but he was unable to save many of them. Unfortunately for Marcus, the Cayuse believed that if a patient died, it was acceptable to kill the healer as an act of retribution. Also, thanks to the poisoned food from a few years earlier, the natives suspected Marcus was trying to kill rather than heal them. On top of everything else, the Cayuse were tired of white people taking their land and resources. On November 29, 1847, several warriors attacked the missionaries. They cut Marcus Whitman's face to pieces, but he lived for several hours after the attack. He continued trying to console his wife until he finally died. After Marcus passed away, his wife Narcissa tried to look outside. She was shot and killed. The Cayuse took 54 missionaries hostage. Most were eventually released, but several died from measles while being held in captivity. Several years later, the Oregon government would demand the surrender of those who attacked the missionaries. On June 3, 1850, the group of warriors who orchestrated the massacre, known as the Cayuse Five, were executed by hanging in Oregon City. Hell's Canyon Massacre. Chinese immigrants began arriving in the United States in the early 1800s. At first, they worked on boats. Eventually, they began working in mines throughout the Western Territories. In October 1886, two groups of Chinese miners decided to go into business for themselves. They started the last part of their journey in Lewiston, Idaho. From there, they traveled upriver to Hell's Canyon in Oregon. The group of Chinese miners decided to stop in early 1887 when they found a shallow part of the river. 13 of them planned to live in the area and search for gold. For the first several weeks, their attempts were successful. The miners began accumulating a significant amount of gold dust from the waters which ran through the canyon. Not far from where the miners were working was a cabin. That cabin was being used by Bruce Evans and his gang of outlaws. They planned to relieve the Chinese miners of their gold and their lives. In April 1887, Bruce Evans and his gang began shooting at the Chinese miners from bluffs above their camp. The miners tried to retreat but ran into another part of the gang that was waiting for them. 12 of the miners were killed by gunfire. The last one had his brains beaten out with a rock. Bruce Evans and his men took the gold dust, then threw the bodies in the river. The next day, 8 more Chinese miners showed up in a boat. The gang killed them, then stole their gold dust and the boat. The outlaws traveled down the river to another Chinese camp. Once arriving, they killed 13 more miners. In total, 34 Chinese miners were murdered. A news article published soon after the event said, "The brutality of the Snake River atrocity was probably unexcelled, whether by whites or Indians, in all the anti-Chinese violence of the American West. After the first day's onslaught at Robinson Gulch, the killers wrecked and burned the camp and then threw the mutilated corpses into the Snake River. The bodies of the other Chinese received similar treatment. Since it was the high water stage of the spring runoff, the dead Chinese were found for months, some accounts say for years, afterwards along the lower river." Another news article from 1887 blamed the Chinese miners for their fate. It said, "More than likely it was the whites who look with an evil eye upon Chinese intrusion in American mines. The American miner kicks hard at the Chinese miner." 3 members of the gang were captured and brought to trial on August 29, 1888. They were found not guilty on September 1st. In the end, nobody was ever punished for the massacre. Unfortunately, Chinese miners experienced frequent acts of violence in the 1800s. If you want to learn about another horrible incident, we suggest a previous episode called Rock Springs Massacre. The Dead Babysitter. Sherry and Wayne Fung were married in 1951. Their marriage was unusual for the 1950s. Wayne was Chinese and Sherry was white. Although many disapproved of their marriage, the couple stayed together. They lived in Portland, Oregon. By 1954, their union had produced 2 children. On January 6, 1954, Sherry and Wayne hired 16-year-old Diane Hanks to babysit their children. Diane left Sherry and Wayne's house later that evening, but nobody saw her again after that. Diane was missing. Sherry and Wayne were the last 2 people to see her. On January 27th, Sherry ran a personal ad in the local paper that said, "Diane, please contact me regardless of your present circumstances or anything you may have done. I'll help you all I can. Sherry." The fate of Diane Hanks would finally become clear on February 27th. A road crew found her body wrapped in 2 blankets. Her hands were tied with rope. An autopsy found that Diane had consumed martinis and barbiturates. The combination of alcohol and pills likely caused her to lose consciousness and stop breathing. The police immediately arrested Sherry and Wayne. In their opinion, Diane was corrupted by befriending the mixed-race couple. It also didn't help that Wayne had been convicted of selling narcotics in 1948. The police tried everything they could to get a confession from Sherry. First, they interrogated her for 16 hours without rest. Sherry claimed that at one point the police drugged her to try and get her to confess. The detective in charge of the investigation claimed Sherry was lying. Although there was no evidence that the couple killed Diane, they were put on trial for murder in 1955. The jury found Sherry and Wayne guilty and sentenced them to die in the gas chamber. The judge overturned the verdict because of the circumstantial evidence. Yet another attempt was made to prosecute. This time, the pair were tried separately. Wayne was put on trial for Diane's murder and was found not guilty. However, Sherry was found guilty of second-degree murder. In 1957, the Oregon Supreme Court overturned the conviction and set her free. The police kept their eye on Wayne and Sherry over the next year. In 1958, Wayne was arrested for selling heroin and was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. He was paroled in 1970, then began selling drugs again. He died in prison in 1976 after supposedly falling in the shower. Sherry stayed out of trouble after being freed from prison. She passed away in 1987. Oregon's deadliest crash. Late on the night of December 23, 1965, travelers were trying to get home for the holidays. 38 of them were in a Greyhound bus that was traveling down the highway. Many of the passengers were asleep. The storage areas above them were filled with wrapped Christmas presents. As the bus was near Cold Hill, Oregon, it moved into the left lane to pass a truck. After passing the truck, the bus tried to move back into the right lane. It hit a patch of ice and started fishtailing. The driver lost control and the bus flew off the highway and began rolling down a hill. Some passengers were thrown out of the bus as it rolled. Others were tossed around inside the vehicle as heavy luggage pounded them. 9 people were dead by the time the bus stopped moving. 3 more would die in hospitals over the next 2 days. 25 had to be treated for serious injuries but survived. 3 weeks later, the district attorney's office investigated the bus driver. He was found to not be at fault. This event remains the deadliest traffic accident in Oregon history. 1986 Mount Hood disaster. Mount Hood is the highest point in Oregon at roughly 11,235 feet above sea level. It is such a prominent landmark that on a clear day it's possible to see the peak of the mountain from 100 miles away. Mount Hood is a popular destination for climbers. It is also quite dangerous since at least 130 people have died while trying to conquer the mountain. In one case, most of the victims were children. On May 12, 1986, 7 students from the Oregon Episcopal School joined a climbing excursion. It was part of an adventure program required by the school. Around 3 a.m., they departed with 13 other climbers. Thomas Goman was the school's chaplain and the expedition leader. He knew bad weather was coming, but remained convinced that the group could finish climbing before the storm arrived. 2 hours after starting their climb, a blinding snowstorm descended upon the students. Thomas decided to build a snow cave so he and the other climbers could shelter in place. However, the cave wasn't big enough to hold everyone. The next morning, one of the guides, named Ralph Summers, decided to descend the mountain and find help. Thomas Goman and most of the students who stayed behind froze to death before being rescued. Search and rescue was notified on May 13th. They searched for 2 days, finally finding the remaining survivors in the snow cave. The other climbers were dead and buried in the snow. Before search and rescue completed their mission, 9 dead climbers were recovered. The Oregon Episcopal School investigated the disaster and determined that it was Thomas Goman's fault. They also paid settlements to the families affected by the disaster. We didn't have time to cover the numerous fires and floods that have destroyed livelihoods and ended lives in Oregon. There is just too much terrible history to cover for one episode. What do you think about the state of Oregon? Is it still attractive for its natural beauty? Or is it simply an attractive disguise for delivering random death? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and let us know which state we should cover next. If you're still watching, do us a favor, please. Like this video and any others that entertain or educate you. It really does help our channel reach a wider audience. Thank you for watching Bad Things in History.